Hey everyone, I am MSK, aka Master Swag King, coming at you guys today with another video. And in today's video, I am going to be talking about why Japanese manga is outselling American comic books in the West. So me and Iron Oxide did a video similar like this back in 2023, and I highly recommend you guys go and watch that video because we give our specific reasons why American comic books have been falling to the wayside and getting massively outsold by Japanese manga. Now, this conversation always teeters into many different directions, give or take who you ask, right? But I do want to make sure I bring up this very crucial point at the beginning part of this video, because this is something that a lot of people tend to have as a mindset, which I find very weird, but I don't, because this is just kind of how the state of things were back then. So when American comic books actually were selling quite well, and I'm going to put a piece of context in there as well, because when people mention they sold very well, okay, so guys, basically the companies make the books, then distributors buy the books, and the distributors sell them to your local, comic book shop, or as in like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon terms, they'd be like a local card store, right? Well, if a local store just buys units, that's just them buying units to sell to you. That's not like a person individually buying those units, right? So you know how people push those sales units actually? Well, that's not an individual person buying those books. That's a store ordering them from the distributor, okay? So that's how these stores end up with a lot of this like dead product they can't sell, because they're buying all of this many products and they can't sell them. But on sales numbers, it'll show like, oh, this has 5,000 units pushed, or like 6,000 units. Well, did 5,000 individual people buy those units? No, that's not true, actually. But that's just a piece of context you need to understand when we're talking about this thing, right? Then the other thing to bring up that is really important is, from my point of view, because I've been following manga for as long as I can remember. I mean, I have Shonen Jumps over there, but when they were like a collage, of other manga stories. And then I have the final issue over there as well, where they revealed that they were going to be going all digital. Manga consistently has always been pretty much outselling American comic books. You can go and look that information up yourself. I mean, the most popular animes that a lot of people know, like Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, Bleach, all were definitively, from my point of view, from what I saw, outselling manga. Guys, these mangas were pushing like 1 million, almost 2 million plus. On average, probably 1.5, Was any comic book really ever doing $1 million in sales? I didn't see it. I think the highest selling comic book ever is like some Batman title at like 500K. Like 500K is nothing compared to 1 million, for talking just the discrepancy of like what their big numbers they're going for versus what we're going for, right? And what's also weird is that now, not only is manga outselling American comic books, well, characters like Dogman are outselling too, right? So the things that I want to narrow down here as to the reason why people are getting into manga compared to American comic books is, okay, so I might forget one of these here and there, but you guys can kind of follow what I'm going to say here. So the first thing I'm going to mention that's the most important is continuity, okay? Continuity as far as like when you try to get your friend or friends or mom or dad or uncle or aunt into this stuff, and they ask you this one simple basic thing: where do I start? Well, when it comes to American comic books, let's say like Marvel and DC, yeah, that's really hard because there's many different iterations of these characters, from originally when they first start versus when they had a reboot versus when they have potentially now where they're at, right? So there's this like beginning, middle, and where we're currently at right now, right? So there's this huge also big problem in that, because people just don't know where to start, and it's just, they feel like it's too much to get into, right? Whereas with manga, if someone just wants to get into Dragon Ball, right? You start at Dragon Ball Volume 1. Naruto, you start at Naruto Volume 1. One Piece Volume 1. Bleach Volume 1. My Hero Academia Volume 1. Demon Slayer Volume 1. Do you guys see what I'm saying here? You literally just go to book 1. That's it. Now, what I will give credit to is people need to understand trade paperbacks and omnibuses that are collected versions of the character stories do specifically state it's volume 1, but that's not going to do much good, because that's not exactly where people kind of want to start when they're starting a journey into something new. naturally, when people want to start something new, they want to start at the very beginning and then work their way up to kind of learn more about what they're actually going through. So I'll give you as an example here. So let's say if you wanted to get into Batman and you saw Batman Eternal at your Barnes and Nobles, right? And you asked me, hey, random stranger, is this where Batman first started, Batman Eternal, this trade paperback volume 1? I'd be like, no, but this is kind of like a start for one of his stories. Keep in mind, even if you're going through trade paperbacks, there's volume 1 in many different stories. There's omnibuses, volume 1 at many different stories, okay? So yes, I can agree with people that they do have volume 1s in some stuff in comic books, but it's not the same compared to like a manga. The second thing to bring up is the whole many genres. So like with comic books, there's pretty much a unified front that superheroes just do the best for the most part. Whereas with like manga, people need to understand manga also has that too. I'm pretty sure most best-selling mangas are related to more like super-powered individual beings, right? But with manga, there is more slice of life, which means there's more genres like cooking, soccer, football. If you just like big titty women, there's probably a manga for that. And what people like in that is that the big titty women anime don't be affecting like my ninja anime and Naruto. Like soccer is not invading like Dragon Ball. Like that's not to say that these animes don't have like one-off episodes where they're playing like baseball or something like in Dragon Ball Super. It's just to mention that you're not gonna basically have like, okay, now Goku just got done fighting Jiren. Fucking hell. Now we're gonna have a whole arc based around Goku learning soccer. It's like, what the hell? See what I'm saying there? You have manga doing their own thing in one doing their own thing in one, and one doing their own thing in another. That's what I'm talking about, okay? The third thing to bring up is that manga does a very good job of just actually telling you the story. And I know a lot of you guys know what I'm going to bring up here. What I'm saying is they do, for the most part, from most anime I've ever seen, they don't generally try to insert their politics into the books, right? These books that come out now, and I'm not saying they all do that. Most of them are just not good. The insertion of politics has really, really like dampened people's want on just wanting to buy the books, because there's many examples of creators doing this and people go, well, I don't really want to be reading that. I just want to read a story about my heroes doing something heroic, and I just want the story, right? So that's another big problem, is the creators keep constantly putting in their politics into the stories, and people are trying to read this stuff for an escape. They do not want to hear about like why you, or about what you would do as fucking Captain America, or what you would do as Batman, or what you would do as Spider-Man. No, they want to know what Spider-Man and Batman and Superman would do in those specific moments. They do not want to hear about what your fucking pronouns or you to self-insert yourself in the books. Nobody wants to read that. Nobody cares. And the numbers show it, okay? The other thing to bring up is discoverability. So what I've also noticed with American comic books compared to manga is the discoverability of them has gotten pretty darn hard, actually. So people are going to ask, what do I mean by that? Okay, so do you know how you go to a Barnes and Nobles and there's just a rack of like graphic novels, a collection of stories with many different characters like Venom, Spider-Man, X-Men, Harley Quinn, Justice League, Batman, all that stuff, okay? So that's what I'm talking about. Comic books have not become readily available in big locations to have a massive, wide reach, okay? Whereas with manga, you have the Shonen Jump app, costs like $3.99, whatever. You get all these different mangas, right? Then manga is also sold at big box retailers, not just Barnes and Nobles or bookstores. So you'll have just a wide range of access to the medium in general compared to American comic books. When you go to a place like Walmart, Target, you're not going to be able to buy like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man graphic novels there. You're mostly going to have manga. And right there, just look at that. On the rack, if I see a manga that I want to buy, I usually get the My Hero Academia ones, I'll just buy that. Now imagine if that was a Batman graphic novel, Superman graphic novel, Spider-Man graphic novel. Just imagine that. There you go. That's someone you could get into that. Be like, oh, I like Batman. I'm going to read the story. Doesn't matter if like you're going to be able to start there. Just them being able to see it physically in front of them is something that's important, right? Because we know a lot of people are generally kind of stupid. If you don't really put it right in front of them, they're just not going to notice it, right? So another thing to bring up is, yes, Marvel and DC do have their own apps for their comics, right? But not only do you not have a full range of access to all of the comics they've ever produced, that's also a big problem that I would say right there. Plus, I think the price barrier to entry on them is a little too high. And I definitely have always for making the most money, but you're seeing just how many people have been able to specifically get into like just buying this on the Jump app because it's $3.99. If you make it a low barrier to entry for people, they'll flock to it. And the number of people you are going to get will definitely outweigh that small price point. Just imagine getting around, I don't know, 10,000 active users off $4.99. You're going to be making some pretty large profit numbers there. But what they're thinking is like, oh, if we don't charge like $12.99, then we're not going to be making our money. And it's like, no. That's the problem there. That's too much money for certain people at certain stages of their life where they can't invest into it, okay? So another thing to bring up around the discoverability point of view is just manga is accessible just almost everywhere to a point where, like, yes, people are going to pirate it, but you could also look at it putting through a paywall, and in the Shonen Jump app, you could like read a bunch of chapters, and then you can kind of go and see, like, okay, this is the book I want to go buy physically. But people need to understand this mindset as well. People that pirate are not going to buy your stuff. That's just something you're just going to have to come to the realization of. It is what it is. They were never going to buy it physically anyway. But then you need to also be able to convince the people that will go buy it physically why you should go buy this manga. And they do that very well with their consistent characters, the consistent line of storytelling, no identity politics in there, none of this pronoun nonsense, none of that. Right? Then on the Shonen Jump app, if you have the notifications turned on, they'll let you know, hey, this new chapter of Dragon Ball Super just dropped. This new chapter of One Punch Man just dropped, you know? So there's many different factors as to why a lot of this stuff has been able to manifest into the way it does. But you can also see it in just how people respond to just buying manga now. Now, Marvel recently has been doing their Epic collections, which collects they're more or less so smaller omnibuses, but those cost like $40-50, and I think people do have money to pay for them. The issue here is, did you know that Marvel put out Epic collections based around like their older comic books? Actually, you probably didn't, because I had to probably tell you that, because you just probably didn't know because they didn't advertise it, right? So just that alone, if you were someone that was into like older comics from like the 70s, the 80s, Marvel has been putting that stuff out. They've been reprinting it in Epic collections. The problem is you probably didn't know that. It's because advertising in the comic books have just been really, really bad. Another thing to bring up is movies. This is the biggest problem the MCU and Marvel Comics had. When the MCU was popping off as hard as they were, none of the movies ever promoted the comic books. Now, that's another thing I'll get into just a second here, but let me finish my thought. So my thought right here, as big as the movies were, the movies could have been that one point where people that wanted to get into these characters, get invested into them, they had a perfect opportunity. The problem here, since continuity and the universe way of storytelling in like Marvel and DC, that goes back to my first original point when this video first started, is let's say you wanted to get into Avengers back when the characters had their first movie back in 2012. Well, the Avengers you saw on the screen are not the same in the book, so the synergy is not there. Comic books had ads sound like the movies, but the movies did not. You know, when someone wants to get into the MCU, how do they get into the MCU? Iron Man 1, which came out back in 2008. You know, you're not jumping in. There's not like, you know, another Iron Man that came out back in fucking 2005 and, you know, you have to watch that one first. It's like, no. So I think that's another big problem too when it comes to like the movies, and just that's a small aspect is like when you have movies now, and DC's been doing this too with their trailers. At the end of the trailers, you see like the 3 comic book recommendations, which I think is great. Like James Gunn had that big sales boost for a lot of the DC creators when he announced his slate, and a lot of people just flocked to go and buy the stories based around these books. You can push sales in these books, but there has to be synergy between the books and the movies and the shows. DC is doing that. Marvel is looking to still not do that. I will give DC credit here. So one of my friends brought up web comics, which is webtoons, which is apparently another form of comic book, which is really, really big. DC actually put out their first webtoon comic book. I saw it at Barnes and Nobles. I was so proud of them when I saw that, guys. I was like, oh, okay, this is a step in the right direction. The problem here, the reason why also American comic books have been not selling as much is because the lack of innovation when it comes to these companies, right? So the way people consume this stuff is not the same way they consume the stuff back in like the 80s or the 70s, right? So you could argue that your phone is the newest newsstand, right? And that your phone could get you into basically buying stuff. We know people are constantly on their phones buying stuff. I mean, that TikTok shop pops off, right? So if you treat people's smartphones and tablets as the newest newsstand or spinner rack or whatever, you will definitely increase your sales. But what I think people need to stop doing is focusing on piracy so much. People that are gonna pirate, we're never gonna buy the stuff in general. And I know there's that stat out there to show like, well, the people that pirate stuff usually buy it. First of all, there's no way of checking that. There's no way of knowing that. You just kind of have to take it as what it is. Some people might buy the physical thing, some people might not. But keep in mind, when you have stuff in the form of digital, we've seen this happen with the PlayStation Store, where like all the content that people bought, or a good amount of it from the PlayStation Store, were just removed, So you want to own this stuff physical, guys, because if the digital apps just go away, then not only did you just lose a whole bunch of money, you lost out a whole bunch of content and books that you were consuming, right? Japanese manga is selling incredibly well in the West, and it seems American comics can't keep up even on their home turf. Manga outsells comics in the West, accounting for almost 45% of all comic book sales in 2022. Manga offers better prices and consumer convenience with a higher page count for a similar price compared to comics. So a lot of people are probably going to go, well, aren't most floppies like $4.99, $5.99? Yes. And, well, depending on which one you're getting, depending on the page count, could be like as much as like $9.99, $6.99. It varies now between $4.99 to like $7.99, give or take which character, give or take variants and all that stuff, right? Now, so $5.99 compared to $10.99 is a better price on this front alone, because you're getting a lot more pages and getting a lot more of a confined story count in that book itself, okay? And the consumer convenience of being able to get the manga at the $10 rate and getting all those chapters in one offers way more than a standard issue floppy, right? Manga has a lower barrier of entry for new readers due to its linear storytelling and diverse range of genres, attracting a wider audience. Yeah, I brought that up earlier in the video, actually. For fans of American comics and graphic novels, there are now two major factions competing in the comics market. Western comics, particularly those published by the Big Two, namely DC Comics and Marvel Comics, and the vast world of Japanese manga. Manga is quite literally the Japanese version of comics, but it's also a unique art form of its own that's been seen as equal to comics for decades. But in recent years, manga has clearly overtaken comics, both in sales and cultural relevance. So this is another thing to bring up too. When you're talking amongst like friends, and this can vary depending on which group of friends you're talking to. Like outside of basically movies, do people generally bring up like comic books actually in their day-to-day situation when it comes to like talking to like the average friend? Probably not. More people, I guarantee you, probably now are talking about like One Piece, Naruto, Yu Yu Hakusho. Also, there's this big. So like with Dawn of DC, they have been doing a very good job of giving like a lot of different other characters, more different titles. I've seen people bring up the saturation argument, and the saturation argument is not a bad one, and it holds a lot of weight in my personal opinion, and I don't disagree with you guys. The problem here is so does manga. Manga has a lot of oversaturation too. The problem here is that, well, the storytelling is there. The storytelling will get you. You won't care about saturation if what you're getting is a good product, Even in the West, particularly in the United States of America, where comics are seen as the mainstream and have been around for decades, manga has been consistently outselling the former. Even with action figures in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, bolstering consumers' interest. Comics compared poorly to manga in some key areas for their common perception to simple price. Every consumer has their own preference, and there may be no single right answer that explains how manga won the long game in the battle of manga versus comics, but manga undeniably did some things better than comics. A big one that I mentioned earlier in the video is the continuity problems. If you were following Batman in a certain run of like Detective Comics, well, that's not the same Batman you're following now. You see my point there? Like, a lot of people just get naturally turned off by that shit. We're gonna forget the Marvel Ultimate Universe, not the, well, they just rebooted it right now and restarted it right now. But like, imagine that. Imagine following Marvel and then they go, hey, instead of just fixing our main universe and just fixing these characters, we're gonna create a separate universe with the same characters. They'll be a bit different to reimagine them. It's like, that's fucking stupid. Why not just like fix the stuff you have right there? What is the point of that? You know? And now there's rumors that DC might do an Ultimate Universe. It's like, oh my fucking God, dude. It's not that hard. Manga offered better prices and consumer convenience. So you can see right here, top selling manga of 2023, according to Shonen Jump News. Blue Lock, Jujutsu Kaisen, One Piece, Oshi no Ko, Chainsaw Man. Okay? So then you also have many news sources state that manga has been selling incredibly well in the West within the last few years, and titles such as Demon Slayer, Jujutsu Kaisen, and My Hero Academia all appeared on bestseller lists with impressive regularity. Yes, that is important to bring up because that means that the people that are buying like issue 1 are coming back for issue 2. People who are buying issue 2 come back for issue 3. When you're at issue like 35, people are coming back. And I know like Marvel has this thing even recently where they're constantly rebooting to number 1. That's a Marvel thing. DC's done it too, but like Marvel really does it where you're following a character up to like issue number like 20. You can still have regulars for that issue. But no, reboot to issue number 1 because issue number 1 always gets a bump in sales. As publishers Weekly cited, manga sales accounted for almost 45% of all comic books sold in 2022. Manga sales also outpaced the once dominant children's comics and helped revive comic sales in 2022. This was important since the COVID-19 pandemic decimated countless industries. Publishers Weekly also credited the surge of interest in manga to anime's unstoppable mainstream popularity. For comparison's sake, and as per Business Insider, comic sales in 2021 hit a record-breaking sale of $2.75 billion, with manga accounting for $1.47 billion. Attack on Titan was specifically cited as one of the best-selling manga titles of 2021. Meanwhile, single comic issues, which are comics' classic format, only accounted for $435 million. Clearly, manga was more mainstream and popular than ever. So, yes, that number is true. I've even checked it myself. Now, keep in mind, there are a lot of people are going to go, 435 million, that's a lot. No. If the entire industry accounts for that number, that sales number right there for floppies is pathetic. That's pathetic. 1.47 billion compared to 435 million. That is not the same under any circumstance, okay, guys? It's not the same, okay? So another thing I also want to bring up, this year coming up, you know how I made this video a while ago with Iron Oxide? DC is going to be putting out like their own form of like DC manga where it's going to be like Batman Hush, All-Star Superman, and a few other stories in like a manga style format and putting them in big box retailers. That could push a bump in sales for the other trade paperbacks or omnibuses surrounding those characters, but we'll have to see how that goes. On the practical side of things, manga may have come out as the victor of manga versus comics, maybe because of prices and shopping venues. It was simply more budget friendly to get into manga than comics, especially when comparing the book's page count of a product to the sticker price. Single comic issues, which are around 22 pages long, yeah, it could be 28, 24, give or take which one you're buying, may seem cheap since they cost around $5 per issue. Graphic novels or collections that have 100 pages at the very least can go for as low as $10 depending on title. However, a typical manga volume or tankobon may have been around 160 to 180 pages for $10. So yeah, earlier, just look at this. $10 for a manga book, 180 pages. $5 for a floppy, 22 pages. So you pay a little bit more for more pages, okay? As opposed to richly colored comics, a single manga's volume sheer value was tough to beat. Another factor behind manga's victory when it comes to manga versus comics was where readers can find comics and manga not just how much they must pay for them. Comic books are usually sold in specialty hobby stores, and such shops have a reputation for being intensely geeky places with a very specific type of clientele. Comic shops heavily cater to readers who are already deeply invested in comics' robust but relatively narrow culture. Comic book movies' pop culture dominance has done little to change or improve the perception that comics were a generally male-dominated and juvenile space. Well, that is true. Comics were mostly always dominated by males. Yeah, women can like this stuff, but your demographic is males. That's all it's going to be. Certain comics fandoms' hostility and toxicity also further soured the medium's reputation in the public eye. Well, that's all also a back and forth thing. I wouldn't say it's all on fans, and that's always a case by case basis thing. Conversely, and despite the anime continuity, the community's own fair share of controversies, manga felt more universal, and not just because of the stories found within. Yeah, so I get what they're saying here. Basically, even if someone's a complete dick to you in terms of like manga, whatever, the manga you can get into is just, there you go. You start at volume 1. Manga volumes are usually sold as paperback or hardback books, and they nearly always appear in mainstream bookstores such as Barnes & Noble. Such locations are open and more welcoming to any book lover, not just comic fans who were already part of a certain fandom. This gives Japanese manga far more visibility for shoppers and potential newcomers, and this helps minimize manga's geeky aurora. Anyone who visits their local Barnes & Noble in a search of something fun to read will see not just romance novels and famous fantasy series, but also a huge selection of manga that caters to every kind of reader out there. Manga actually has more in common with comics than it does with typical Barnes & Noble's fare. Yeah, so the highest selling manga usually deals with like superpowered beings, right? But since there's like an easier way of getting into it at, bookstores like Barnes & Noble's, Walmart's, Target's, doesn't really matter. People are just going to end up getting it. Whereas like with comic books, the biggest thing is pretty much superheroes, if we're being honest here, Reading manga may just be as nerdy as a hobby as comics, but it may not feel that way to the average reader who looks for some fun summer reading material because of where it's sold and who buys it. This was more than enough to make all the difference. So right here, the manga has a lower barrier of entry for newer readers than comics do. Top selling comics, according to Bleeding Cool, which is Bleeding Cool, Rich Johnson. So your best-selling comic books compared to Bleeding Cool, okay, was just a bunch of Batman titles. Yeah, because Batman has the biggest line at DC Comics. There's like, I think 14 ongoing Batman series at any give or take any moment, right? Then you also have to factor in all the Batman adjacent characters. Then all like the Batman stories he's a part of, just not even because he's the main character of that said story. The fact that it's this specific Batman breaks my heart. This is not even Detective Comics, guys. So you guys know how there's Detective Comics out there, right? So pretty sure you guys didn't know this. That's not Detective Comics. That's just another Batman ongoing that they have. That's it. It's just called Batman. Even though most people associate Batman with Detective Comics, like Superman is Action Comics, Spider-Man is The Amazing Spider-Man. It's just so confusing. Like, even if you wanted to just get into this, I mean, yeah, you could just go back and get Batman issue number 1 in this one, but it's like, that's a lot different compared to like a manga volume 1, right? Another advantage to reading manga versus comics was its very low barrier of entry. At worst, manga suffers from being read right to left, obviously, which may be mildly disorienting to new readers. Manga also tends to feature stories with slower pacing when compared to comics, due in part to the fact that it was designed to be released on a weekly basis in Japan. Comics, conversely, are released monthly, meaning a single issue's pace is faster and more concise than a full manga volume. For example, a face-off between two superpowered characters can be concluded in one comic issue, but can take multiple manga volumes to finish. Fortunately for the manga industry, manga's narrative advantages are much bigger, starting with how linear manga is. And remember, linear doesn't mean they're talking down to you. It's just, hey, if you're like brand new to this, you can get into it and you're not going to feel overwhelmed. Any manga series has one straightforward story, and the volumes go in order and beyond. Volume 1 is followed by volumes 2 and 3 and so forth. This makes manga more similar to serialized novels that are meant to be read in order. On the other hand, comics tend to be all over the place. Even if comic publishers make an effort to provide clear entry points and detailed guides for their countless rebooted universes, alternate universes, and new storylines, it can still be too daunting and overwhelming for potential newcomers to even start. So I'll give you an example here. There's this Venom story called Lethal Protector. Then there's like other stories called Venom Lethal Protector that have nothing to do with the original Lethal Protector. See my point there? That's literally just in that itself, all over the place. There's a Venom story called Lethal Protector, which is like 6 issues or whatever. I haven't read it yet, but I think about picking it up soon. But then there's this like newer version of it out there. And it's like, well, which one's first if you're trying to put that to someone, right? And new storylines, it can still be too daunting and overwhelming for potential newcomers to even start. Manga doesn't suffer from a confusing, decades-old web of interconnected stories, endless retcons, and alternate continuities to sort through. Manga that came with such baggage like the sprawling cosmic epic that is Dragon Ball or Mobile Suit Gundam. Different centuries and histories were the exceptions, not the rule. Yeah, the only anime that kind of really does that is like Gundam. Gundam is primarily different heroes each series, but like you're not going to get that like every single time, right? Meanwhile, this kind of imposing world building was the norm in comics. Every mainstream superhero like Spawn or Wonder Woman had tons of lore and continuities for newcomers to study. This hasn't even covered the teen comics, which starred multiple characters with their own individual histories separate from the team's united stories. Things often get so convoluted in comics that even a complete continuity reboot like the X-Men's Krakoa era was still built on the X-Men's countless past iterations. Manga may also be selling better than comics because of their more accessible content. Comics appealed greatly to superhero enthusiasts and fans of gritty, hyper-masculine deconstructions of the former. It's hard not to see comics as a juvenile art form and hobby, mainly made for men by men, which is true. Comics made for different genres and ages and genders have always been around, and the industry has recently taken great strides to diversify the artists they hire and to whom they sell comics to. That's the problem right there. Nobody wants that. Nobody likes that. This diversity, inclusivity, gender swapping, all that stuff's trash. I'm telling you right now, those people don't buy comics. That's not your audience. Your audience is primarily men. Take it for what it is. Your audience is primarily men. Now, manga does that, and they know that, hey, if you're a woman and you like woman anime, go and read that. But like, obviously, that's not going to be the biggest draw there. This is why the American comic industry fell apart the way it did, focusing on all this different stuff that didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Their biggest demographic is dudes. Why are we focusing on like fucking rainbow flag people, who don't even buy books? Actually, you know. It's also worth noting that indie comics have been going strong since the 90s, with the late 2010s being a great time for new indie artists and writers. However, these tend to be overshadowed by mainstream manly titles and genres. That's nonsense. Yeah, indie comics have been on the rise lately, and I've bought some indie comics myself, and I would love it if indie comics got more attention because, some of those creators out there are telling some really good stories. What's more, the industry still predominantly caters to male-coded interests, as they should. I don't know why. Like, oh my god, here. CBR put out this is very good information here. But then they gotta put in their little agendas there. It's like, oh, it's always male-coded stories. Just shut the fuck up, man. Shut the fuck up, dude. So fucking stupid. Yeah, it's a male-dominated thing. When women can like it, you know what? Women like it just the way it is. What do you gotta change it for? Women don't like that shit either. Women just want to see hot dudes doing stuff, This prevailing mindset was partly the reason why Batman continues to be the highest selling superhero comics and why violent action comics like Berserker will always have an audience. I love how they completely just contradicted what the hell they were talking about there. Yeah, they've been making great strides to do diversity. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, but Batman still outsells them all because, well, he has the most titles, but it even shows you people don't care about all that diversity bullshit, right? They're just like a character doing fucking bullshit, The self-imposed rigidity greatly limited who bought comics or made them, making the medium too niche when contrasted to the endless possibilities of manga. Sales reflected the ever-widening divide between manga versus comics. The manga industry also suffers from its own problems and its own version of the systematic sexism that's been holding comics back for decades. Oh, shut the fuck up. Oh my god. Sorry, I'm blowing my nose here. Sorry about that. But it undeniably pushed more genres and kinds of stories than comics do. Only the already dedicated fans would spend serious cash on yet another reboot of the Avengers or Superman, or on another reprint of one of DC's or Marvel's iconic storylines from yesteryear. Conversely, anyone can fall in love with the more down-to-earth stories found in slice of life, romance, and comedy manga stories. Manga has plenty of action series too, such as Shonen Jump's ongoing Dark Trio, which are successors of the legendary Big Three, and Seinen titles like Vagabond and Berserk. But manga as a whole simply has more variety. This unsurprisingly attracts far more readers, especially younger ones. This diverse portfolio, along with lower barriers to entry, high visibility in bookstores, and excellent prices, makes manga the industry juggernaut it is, beating comics at their game on their own home turf. When it comes to manga versus comics, manga was the clear winner. So the one problem I have with what they're bringing up here is this diversified bullshit argument. Okay, so even in the data that they just put here, Batman, that's diversity. Batman outsells everyone. Yes, manga's going to have an advantage when it comes to the diverse catalog of genres that there are. I don't disagree that has an impact on how people get into it, right? But to say that is the main reason why is like, no. At the tail end of it, people like the more super-powered superhero mangas. They just do. Why do you think Shonen Jump sells so well? Like, look at this stuff compared to Shonen Jump. Now, typically, they are a battle shonen type of anime community and company. Look at all this stuff. Jujutsu Kaisen, superpowered beings. One Piece, superpowered beings. Chainsaw Man, dealing with oddly superpowered beings. One Punch Man, sells very well. Superpowered beings. My Hero Academia, superpowered beings. Okay? People need to understand this when it comes to manga. The superhero stuff sells the best. Okay? And it's proven too, right? So there's so much to constantly bring up here when it comes to the ongoing argument of like why manga is outselling comic books in the West. I mean, but I think the big narrowing three to bring it down to is continuity and interconnected stories being all over the place. for American comic books, accessibility, and also the interjection of politics and bullshit into American comic books have really soured them, right? Just when it comes to manga, lower barrier to entry point, consistency when it comes to the storytelling, and the more bang for your buck when you buy a manga compared to a single issue floppy, and the convenience of being able to buy a manga at give or take big box retailers compared to comic books, which you primarily have to buy through stores like eBay, Amazon, going to your local comic book shop. There's places in the world that don't have comic book shops. People need to understand this. There are places out there that don't have comic book shops. How would you be able to get books then? You legitimately have to buy them online, or you legitimately have to go to your big box retailer. And if they don't have them at your big box retailer, which they won't because they don't have Epic Collections or graphic novels like that at Walmart and Target. I mean, Ollie's, we don't even have that here. So the best way I buy this stuff is I just buy it online, or once in a while I go to Barnes and Nobles and I get it, or if my local Walmart has like random mangas that I want to get or whatever, then I buy it. So people need to also understand this too. Dogman outsells American comic books in the West as well. Dogman's a kid's book. So kids would rather read a story about a dude with a dog head than Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men. And that's a problem with the actual storytelling, where people come to find out that there's been a lot of bullshit that has happened with these characters in the comic books, and they don't even want their kids even reading that shit. And why would you? Why would you want your kid watching, like, I don't know, Batman Begins, and then you go and read him in a comic book where he's not even being Batman, where he's getting talked down to by characters like Catwoman? What the hell are we doing here? But what do you guys think? Why is manga outselling comic books in the West? Give me your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. I'm MSK, aka Master Swag King, and I'm signing out, guys. See you guys later. Deuces. Peace.